Good morning from the North San Diego County Association of Realtors, and welcome to today's webinar, Fair Housing with Carmen DT. Also be sure to register for our webinar on this coming Thursday, Multicultural Market Driving Home Ownership. So for more information or to register for that webinar, please go to www.nsdcar.com/webinar. So without any further ado, we are going to start the webinar now. Connie, go ahead and take it away.
All right, thank you, Shirley, and thank you for joining us today. My name's Connie Torossian. I'll be your presenter today. Today we'll be talking about fair housing best practices for the housing industry. A little bit about myself. I work with the CSA San Diego County, which is your local fair housing organization. And I do have over 20 years experience in nonprofit housing, fair housing, rental, credit, and homeownership counseling and education. And I've helped a lot of organizations develop their fair housing programs, outreach and educational programs, their private enforcement grants. So they go out and do investigations, and done a lot of education for the housing industry through NeighborWorks America, CAR, ARIA, NowRep, and a host of other real estate associations. So we're going to go ahead and jump right in. I'm going to tell you a little bit about CSA San Diego. If you do have questions, feel free to message me in the chat box. We will get to questions for sure at the end, but as we go through the presentation, I certainly want this to be an interactive presentation. I want to get all your questions answered, so feel free to message me and I'll be happy to answer questions. So CSA is a nonprofit HUD approved housing counseling agency with over 50 years experience in fair housing. We provide rental counseling, mediation, and landlord tenant issues. And of course, we also educate individuals on fair housing issues and take fair housing complaints. We also provide hate crime prevention, civil rights education for first-generation immigrants, human trafficking prevention, and civic engagement. So as you can imagine, we've been very busy with all of the housing issues that are going on with COVID-19. Our mission at CSA is the promotion of social justice and public welfare through programs, services, advocacy against all forms of discrimination, including the advocacy for eradication of housing discrimination to ensure equal housing opportunity for all individuals. We're committed to promoting and enforcing fair housing laws and housing opportunities for all who live in San Diego. So I want you to know that we are a resource for you. We're not the bad guys. We're actually the good guys that want to help educate you, make sure that you don't have a complaint, or a lot of times with my education that I do with realtors, I find out that the realtors are the ones who actually recognize the discrimination going on for their clients and will encourage them to make a complaint. So we want you to make sure to do that. So today we're going to cover federal fair housing laws, and we're also going to cover the state fair housing laws. Federal fair housing laws include all of the protected classes that include race, color, national origin, religion, sex, and familial status, meaning the presence of children under 18 in the home, and also disability. This can include a physical disability or a mental impairment, which limits an individual's major life activity. Also includes HIV and AIDS and those recovering from under the California the California fair housing laws, we have more protections. We have sexual orientation, gender identity and expression, marital status, medical condition, ancestry, source of income, age, genetic information, and arbitrary discrimination. Arbitrary discrimination would be something like, I don't like individuals that have mustaches, so therefore I'm not going to rent to them, which could, be construed as discrimination. Or say, for instance, you don't rent to people that have tattoos because you think they're affiliated with gang. That would be a form of arbitrary discrimination. So we do work with HUD and the Department of Fair Employment and Housing, and they also do take complaints of housing discrimination. You can go through our agency, we'll report it to HUD, or you can go directly to those agencies and make a report as well. So what is housing discrimination? It includes blocking someone's access to housing, treating one renter or buyer differently, denying someone the right to buy or rent a home even though they can afford the property, all because that person is a member of a protected class. So let's talk a little bit about the types of housing that is covered under the Fair Housing Act. It includes owner-occupied buildings with no more than 4 units. Excuse me, I apologize. It includes all housing except owner-occupied buildings with no more than 4 units, single-family houses sold or rented by the owner without the use of an agent, and housing operated by religious organizations or private clubs that limit occupancy to their members. So what's prohibited in rental housing? Refusing to rent or sell housing, refusing to negotiate for housing, treating people differently, setting different terms, conditions, or privileges, steering individuals. We're going to talk about that a little bit later and go into more detail about steering. Falsely denying that housing is available, blockbusting, advertising a preference, imposing different pricing for some, using different qualification criteria or applications for some, eviction of a tenant's guest, harassing a person, failing or delaying performance of repairs or maintenance, limiting privileges, services, or facilities, and assigning tenants to a specific units, buildings, or parts of the complex based on their protected classes. We see this happen usually in rental properties where people say, oh, we have a family building in the back because, you know, those kids are very noisy. They're not allowed to do, to put, you know, families with children way in the back of the building. But we'll talk a little bit more about that when we get into steering. So some examples of rental discrimination is lying about the availability of housing, setting different rental terms for different people. For example, we've seen cases where people will charge a higher rent for families with children because they have more people in their family, or failing to respond to inquiries or provide rental application to individuals. So it's really important that you have rules and procedures and you follow those to make sure that it could not be construed as discrimination. Some examples of discrimination in real estate sales is lying about or exaggerating sales terms, failing to inform buyers about all the listings, stalling to avoid showing a home, steering buyers to certain neighborhoods, refusing to negotiate with prospective buyers. An example of this is only showing Vietnamese families houses in a predominantly Vietnamese neighborhood, even though they've expressed interest in different neighborhoods. So that's kind of an obvious example. And sometimes it's not meant to be discriminatory, but it can be construed as discrimination. So some additional examples of housing discrimination is running a discriminatory rental or sale ad. For example, you may be describing the property saying it's near a Catholic church or a Jewish temple, not thinking that that's that could be construed as discrimination, but it could be saying that you're preferring a preference even though you're not. Blockbusting, where you go, where individuals go in and say, hey, did you know, all of these Hispanics are moving in, they're bringing down the neighborhood, you need to sell your property. That would be an example of blockbusting. Creating or enforcing zoning laws that have a discriminatory effect. Inducing people into selling or renting their homes by telling them members of a protected class are going to move in their neighborhood, or intimidating someone so that he or she will not file a housing discrimination complaint. Some examples of mortgage discrimination are scrutinizing one person's loan application more closely than another, giving an unreasonably low appraisal, imposing different loan terms or conditions, or denying loans in certain neighborhoods, which is also known as redlining. So we talked a little bit about the different types of examples of discrimination. Now we're going to talk about disability protections, and also with the influx of COVID-19, it is having an impact on fair housing. We've seen discrimination against Asian Americans has increased nationally due to COVID-19. It is illegal to deny housing due to being from one of the countries affected by COVID-19. That would be protection under national origin. It's also illegal to have different rules for persons due to the fact that they're from a country affected by COVID-19, or even if they're just perceived to be from that particular country. It's illegal to harass due to the stigma, refusal to rent, or accusations of contamination. And individuals who may have COVID-19 or caring for somebody who has COVID-19 could be covered by the disability protections under the Federal Fair Housing Act. So there has been, a lot of information coming out in regards to COVID-19 and protection. So we're just, trying to get the education out there so that individuals know their rights and are able to exercise those rights. So under familial status, we also, so that's the presence of children or anyone under the age of 18 who resides with a parent or another person with legal custody. Includes foster parents as well, or anyone who has legal custody of the children. Also includes pregnant women or people adopting, otherwise securing legal custody of anyone under the age of 18. You must apply the rules equally to everyone and enforce consistently. And if it's specific to children, it should be based on the health and safety and must address the health and safety issue. So, for instance, forcing families with children to live on the first floor of a property because you think, oh, it's safer for them to do that, that could be construed as discrimination. Or having a property rule that children can't play outside could also be construed as discrimination on the basis of familial status. So we had a case once where a property manager was going out and giving citations to families because their kids were outside playing ball and doing things, disrupting her. And the families, if they didn't pay the fine, would then be given a notice to vacate or evicted from the property. And so we got several complaints from this property management apartment complex, investigated it, and found out that that property manager actually had a gambling problem, was taking cash from the individuals and, taking advantage of the individuals. And anyhow, they ended up getting sued for discrimination as well. So there's a lot of issues in rental properties with children and what rules you can have and what rules you can't. So it's important, if you have questions about it, to reach out to CSA and we can help you with that. Let's move on to more information about families with children. So housing providers, such as a landlord, cannot refuse to rent to an applicant because there are children in the family. The requirements for rental and the terms and conditions must be the same for families with children as they are for any other applicant or tenant. The exception to this rule is housing that's been specifically designated for senior citizens, individuals over 55 and older, or 62 and older. And in order to qualify as a senior housing, a housing accommodation must meet specific defined requirements, which include a minimum number of units have to be designated for seniors, either 55 and older, or sometimes 62 and older. So that they can limit their limit families with children in those types of properties, but it does have to be designated for senior citizens. Okay, so another area where there can be problems is under occupancy standards. So occupancy restrictions are limits on the maximum number of people in a dwelling and are set usually by housing providers. What we found is they can have a disparate impact on families with children if you have overly restrictive occupancy rules. Courts have found that limiting a 2-bedroom to 2 occupants can discriminate against families with children. And what the Department of Fair Employment and Housing recommends is the 2+1 rule, which is 2 persons per bedroom plus 1 for the unit. So this is the lowest, safest standard. There are some other standards for having the maximum number of individuals in a property. But if you stick to the 2+1 rule, you'll probably be safe, which means 2 people per bedroom and 1 per living space. So in a 2-bedroom property, that would be 5 people. You should be safe with that type of occupancy standard. But of course, if you do have any type of questions regarding your occupancy standards, you feel free to outreach to us. So moving right along, some examples of steering. So we talked about families with children having a rule that they must live on the first floor, can be construed as discrimination. We've also seen in property management companies say that children must live in the certain part of the complex due to noise complaints, like in the back of the complex or near the pool or something like that. You can't put those kind of restrictions on families with children. It could be construed as discrimination. Also, suggesting to disabled applicants that they should live in a downstairs unit could also be construed as discrimination. You know, maybe they're going to put in one of those, you know, elevator things or things that take their wheelchair up. It's really up to the individual to decide how they're, if they're able to live in that unit, if it happens to be on the second story. So it looks like we have a couple of questions coming in, so I'm going to go ahead and answer those questions before we get to the steering questions. So first question is, any issues with discrimination if having this in the property description, located a short walk from a desirable school? I wouldn't see any discrimination issues with that. There has been some talk about the real estate industry utilizing school districts and how good the school district is as the code words, kind of, to saying like this is not a diverse community or something like that. But I have not seen anything specifically in regards to that. This is actually of course, you know, for families with children, that would be a benefit. So I don't see anything wrong with that description. Next question, if a landlord does not want roommate situations like college students renting together with multiple applications, one for each student, is this considered discrimination? So I think what that would go back to is the occupancy standards we talked about. And what I would suggest is that you have occupancy standard of 2+1. That's your rule. And as long as they can meet those rules, that would be okay. I I know nobody likes college students, and they don't know, they usually don't have a whole lot of money, so they like to, have a lot of people live in there. But it's up to you to have rules in regards to the property and what your rules are for renting the property out to individuals. I know some people, don't want to have individual leases with 4 different or 5 different people on a lease. So I guess that would be on a case by case basis if you'd like to do that or not. But these are really good questions. So I have some questions for you guys, and I want you to answer me in the chat box. So do you allow children here? Do you think that's discriminatory? Do you think that could be construed as discrimination? They may be asking because they're they could be like me. I'm my son's gone off to college, and I certainly don't want to live around children, but or they could be asking because they have children living there. So although it's illegal to discriminate based on familial status, this question may be asked because the prospective tenant has been denied housing at another apartment based on familial status. So so your answer to the question is we allow all people to live here. It's based on, and so what I say to individuals who are renting out properties, you can't discriminate on the basis of their ability to pay. You're going to look at their credit, you're going to look at their rental history and go ahead and discriminate on them in regards to their payment history and their qualification to be able to afford the property. So that's a great answer. This is an all age community. We allow everybody to live here. So another question you might get is what kind of people live at this property? Now that is definitely a curiosity question, but it also may be a baited question. What do you think your answer to that question should be? What kind of people live at this property? Humans, that's good. Yes. Again, we allow all people to live at this property. This is a diverse community. That's a good answer. Again, individuals, the ones that financially qualify, absolutely. That's exactly what your answer should be. The ones who meet our criteria. So it's important, very important for you as realtors, property managers, to have the criteria and to stick to it. That will help you get, stay out of trouble. And we do send testers out there to test properties. Are we trying to catch you in anything? No, we're just trying to see what's going on out there. And if there is any type of discrimination happening, you wouldn't believe the types of complaints that we get. And individuals, we try to educate them on what the right thing is to do. And they say, you can't tell me, who's going to live at my property. I don't want those kids there. So a lot of times they don't want the kids, the poor kids. But it's not for you to determine that. Like you said, it's really more of a question of whether they financially qualify to be there and they have the rental history, the good rental history that you're going to require of the tenants. So let's talk about steering in steering in real estate. It is illegal in fair housing laws. It's illegal for a real estate agent to make, print, or publish, or cause to be made, printed, or publish any notice, statement, or advertisement with respect to the sale or rental of a property that indicates a preference based on those protected classes we discussed. It's also illegal to show certain areas to certain individuals. We've seen cases where individuals say, hey, I want to live in, let's say, La Jolla. And, you know, they're like, oh no, you can't afford to live in. Look, if the person qualifies and they want to see properties in La Jolla, you show them properties in La Jolla. Or let's say City Heights, you know, you say, oh no, you don't want to go to that neighborhood. That's, you know, horrible neighborhood to live in. It is not for a real estate agent to decide where the individual wants to see properties. You have to let them decide where they'd like to see. And of course, in this market, they have to be able to qualify. Of course, you can certainly go back to that. Are you financially able to qualify? Maybe they can't afford anything in La Jolla. That's a whole nother situation. So discrimination is not limited just to the federal protections. California also has additional protections that we talked about earlier, which include sexual orientation, gender identity and expression, marital status, medical condition, ancestry, source of income, age, genetic information, and arbitrary. So there's a question. I would like to discuss the new CAR guideline regarding buyer love letters. Will this be in the schedule today? So that will not be in the presentation today. I have heard a little bit of information in regards to this, but to be honest, I'm not completely up to date on it, so I wouldn't want to speak on it. But if you do have questions, feel free to outreach to us specifically, and I will get you the answer to your questions. I would say, again, look at it from the perspective of, is this letter going to provide information that may be construed as discrimination, maybe offering a preference? Look at it from that perspective. Another question is, what about perceived illegal sources of income? Well, because you guys have great qualifications and procedures on how you evaluate your individuals, you're going to ask them to verify their income. Actually, it's probably, if you're taking them out to show them properties, the lender's probably going to qualify that. Now, if somebody says, you know, I've got, you know, $1 million cash, I want to pay in diamonds. Yeah, you definitely have a, you can question and verify the, that they have that they have the money in the bank, that they actually have the verification of funds. But again, as a real estate individual, I would assume you would be leaving that up to the lender. And if it's a cash deal, you're going to, again, you know, verify the source of income. So it looks like CAR has developed a form to address this, and there's some chat information going on, so I'll let you guys chat about that. And we'll move right along, and let's talk about the rights of disabled renters and buyers. So disability is any physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more life activities. It includes those with a prior history of drug or alcohol abuse. They have the right to make modifications and be granted reasonable accommodations for full use and enjoyment of the property. Disabled buyers and renters are protected, as are disabled persons residing with someone else, any person associated with the disabled buyer or renter, any person perceived as disabled. One thing I was going to say about those with prior histories of drug and alcohol abuse, here in Orange County, we had a realtor who was sending out advertisements saying, don't allow those sober homes in our property. We got to fight this, and call me. And I picked up the phone and called that realtor and said, you might not want to send that out because individuals who may be having, who are addicts who are in recovery are actually protected. And if a fair housing person got that, a person who works at a fair housing agency or HUD or DFEH saw that, they definitely would be questioning you and your motives. So I'd be really careful with your advertisements and things like that. So reasonable modifications are modifications to the property. They must be allowed, and they are at the resident's expense. It allows physical changes to the property, changes in the private living space, maybe opening doors, widening doors because they're in a wheelchair. And they must be necessary to afford the disabled person full use and enjoyment of the property. Of course, they have to be reasonable. They can't be evicted for making that request. And housing that receives federal financial assistance or is covered by both FHA and Section 504 of the Rehab Act of 1973. It includes implementing regulations, structural changes, or any kind of modification needed by the resident with a disability. In those circumstances, if it is a federally financed property, then the housing provider or management company would be responsible for making those modifications. Usually in just a private property, it would be at the resident's expense. The exception is unless it's going to provide them with an undue financial or administrative burden with the altercation of the property. So what you can request is that residents put the unit back to its original condition if the modification would be less desirable to someone who doesn't require that modification. An example of this is like bathroom grab bars or widening doors. Wouldn't necessarily have to make the tenant put that back, because is it really going to be disruptive to the person who's renting the property after that? It actually may help you in the future in renting the property, knowing that it's wide enough for handicapped individuals. So the Fair Housing Act does allow for a separate security deposit to restore the property back. However, it can't exceed the cost of restoration, and it must accrue interest to the benefit of the resident while they're living there. So for the most part, reasonable modifications must be allowed and are at the resident's expense, unless those exceptions that we discussed earlier. And in regards to the security deposit, you just have to be very careful, put it in a separate account, make sure it accrues interest to the benefit of the resident, and we don't see a whole lot of individuals doing that. So moving right along. Let's talk about reasonable accommodations, which are different than modifications. Reasonable accommodations are changes to rules or policies or procedures, again, that may afford a disabled person the enjoyment of the property. Exemptions from the resident's rules, policy, practices, or services, like covering private living space or common areas. It's not reasonable if it imposes an undue financial or administrative burden on the housing provider. An example of a reasonable accommodation is allowing a service animal or moving a parking space closer to a unit due to an individual's disability. You can't be evicted for making that request. And generally, under the Fair Housing Act, the housing provider is responsible for the cost associated with the reasonable accommodation. Again, unless it's giving an undue financial or administrative burden. Again, it goes back to making sure it's reasonable. Usually changing your rules or policies usually don't cost, allowing somebody to mail in their rent check instead of dropping it off, at the office is not really a difficult accommodation to make. Or moving a parking space is not a difficult accommodation and wouldn't necessarily cost you any money as a housing provider. So some examples of reasonable accommodations are change or adjustment to a rule, policy, practice, or service that may be necessary for an individual with disabilities to have equal opportunity to use and enjoy the dwelling. This includes public and common spaces. Any change in the way things are customarily done that enables the person with disabilities to enjoy the housing opportunity or meet program requirements is also a reasonable accommodation. Since rules, policies, procedures may have different effects on persons with disabilities than on other persons, treating persons with disabilities exactly the same as others will sometimes deny persons with disabilities an equal opportunity to enjoy the dwelling or participate in the program. All persons with disabilities have a right to request or be provided a reasonable accommodation at any time. And again, under Section 504 in the ADA, public housing agencies and other federally assisted housing providers and state and local government entities are required to provide and pay for structural modifications as reasonable accommodations and modifications. So that is reasonable modifications and accommodations. Now we're going to talk about verifying an individual's disability. The provider can ask the tenant or buyer for verification of the disability related to the accommodation or modification. You're only entitled to verification that the tenant has a disability, not identification of the disability or diagnosis, and that there is an identifiable relationship between the requested accommodation and the individual's disability. So I know a lot of times the question comes up, are they really disabled? Are they really just asking for this just because they want to have their dog and not pay the, pet security deposit or whatever it is? So you definitely don't want to get into the habit of verifying people's disability or discussing their disability, but you can definitely ask for verification, doctor's note, and we do have at CSA a packet that we have for housing providers and for tenants requesting accommodation or modifications, so we can help guide you through that process. So some examples of reasonable accommodations is allowing a resident to live in a smoke-free environment. Allowing a tenant to end a lease without incurring a penalty for early termination, changing the date that the rent is due, allowing a tenant to have a cosigner, making certain repairs in a unit to accommodate a resident, providing a tenant an assigned parking space closer to the unit, extending the resident's move-out date, giving a resident the opportunity to correct minor lease violations, and allowing a tenant to move to a first floor unit and transfer the deposit to the new unit. So those are just some examples of reasonable accommodations. And I know a lot of questions come up when we talk about animals in housing. Housing providers must make exceptions to the rule, which are called reasonable accommodations when necessary for people with disabilities to have equal housing opportunities. Refusing to allow necessary service animals or emotional support animals is illegal discrimination. Service animals and emotional support animals are not subject to breed, size, weight restrictions ordinarily applied to pets, and tenants must not be charged pet deposits or pet rent for them. So again, if they do need a service animal or emotional support animal, you can ask for documentation from their doctor. And again, if you have questions about this, feel free to call us, because I know a lot of folks do have questions about animals in housing. So I got a question for you guys. Good old Fluffy. Mr. Rodriguez has a pet dog, Fluffy, and he asked you to waive his no pet policy because he has a disability. Question: should you waive your no pet policy? Let's see what you guys send me a message in the chat box. Let me take a look here. So yes, have to. Yes. Do you have to waive your pet policy? Yes, yes, yes. Well, you guys, I said it was a pet dog. Just because he has a disability, he didn't ask you for it, so it was a trick question. But you're right. You're right about the waiving your no pet policy if he needs it for his disability. So that was a trick question. So appreciate you guys playing along. And I hope you like the pictures of Fluffy because I thought that was really cute. All right, so who's required to comply with reasonable accommodations? Individuals, corporations, associations, others involved in the provision of housing or rental lending, property owners, housing managers, and homeowners. So I've got another question for you, rental question. Mr. and Mrs. Smith have 3 children that are often left unattended. The children are 3 to 12. They aren't bad kids, but they do tend to get in trouble without supervision. What can you do? So what do you think you can do about these pesky little kids? Are you going to write them up? What are you going to do? If you're worried about them leaving them unattended, well, so it's not your responsibility to be in charge of the kids. Now, if they're violating some of your rules on your property, of course, you can address the rules, health and safety rules, and you can talk to the parents about it. I guess it depends on what kind of trouble they're getting into. If they're starting a fire in the kitchen, yes, you can definitely address that with the that's a health and safety issue. So just remember, when addressing children and parent and families with children, it should address the health and safety issue. All right, I got a sales question for you. Kathy is looking for a home in her neighborhood close to her office. She has good income and credit. When she visits the real estate office and asks about homes in the area she's interested, the agent begins telling her about homes available in another section of town. Now, would that be discriminatory? What do you guys think? Send me a message in the chat box. That would be considered, yes, it would be considered steering. So not necessarily if she proposes homes in this area too. Good, good. See, you guys are learning. So to answer the question, it could be considered discriminatory, but most often it probably wouldn't, because you need to show the person areas that they are interested in buying, right? And then it goes back to, if they want to see houses in La Jolla and they can't afford houses in La Jolla, you could certainly take them to La Jolla. You probably won't take them to places in La Jolla because they can't afford it. So if it goes back to the finances, of course, you can say, I'll show you properties in La Jolla, but you're only qualified for 300,000 and you're probably not even going to get, a driveway in La Jolla. So anyhow, it's up to the individual to decide where they would like to look for properties. Of course, you guys are going to help guide them in that process. So moving right along. How to avoid discrimination. Of course, the #1 way to avoid discrimination is to train your staff consistently on local, state, federal regulations. Standardize your management practices. Make sure you're posting the Fair Housing logo prominently on the property, in the office, in the front office, in your real estate office, and let them know that you abide by fair housing rules. Distribute materials and information equally to all interested parties, and standardize the process of maintaining wait list or interest list. Brief staff daily as to the availability of units, and don't show different units to different prospective applicants, and also don't show unclean units to prospective applicants because it may deter people, obviously, if they see a dirty unit. So that comes to almost the close of what we're of our presentation today. I want you guys to know that you can always contact us at CSA if you have questions. You want to have questions about reasonable accommodations, modifications, fair housing issues. We're here to help you. We work to ensure protections under fair housing laws, and we also provide dispute mediation for landlord-tenant, neighbor-to-neighbor disputes. We do educational workshops for tenants and landlords, and we do provide our services in English, Spanish, and Arabic. So if you have individuals who need those language options, feel free to outreach to us.
You're muted, Connie. Looks like we lost everything. You're muted. You're mute.
There we go. Sorry about that. My computer just died for a sec, so apologies for that. So if you can send me your message, your questions in the chat box again, I'll be happy to answer your questions. I'm going to go through these slides, get to my end here. So did you happen to catch some of the questions that were in the chat boxes? I'm not able to see them.
What is the best contact information for you?
So we have CSA San Diego. My information I will provide to Shirley and she can send out to you, but you can contact CSA San Diego at 619-444-5700 or go to our website at c4sa.org. And we have lots of great information on our website. Or you can call and talk to one of our housing counselors. Did we have additional questions?
I was trying to see, okay, I think you talked about the steering. There was a couple people that had Q&As.
Okay, what was their question?
I'm not quite sure. What if you know of an area that is known to have high crime? Can you share this information?
If the person asks specifically about, what are the crime statistics, I would have them go look it up and say, you should be checking out the property. If you happen to know, that this area has lots of theft, or, it depends, I guess, where you're getting that information is from a verifiable source and the person has asked you about it. I wouldn't say, oh, you don't want to live in City Heights because that area is, has a lot of gang shootings or something like that. If they've asked to show you to show them properties in City Heights, I would have them do the research themselves.
Okay. Also, but you can't use source of income as a determining factor, can you?
Source of income, meaning, so source of income is a protected class. So what that means is, say for instance, they're part of the Section 8 program and they're getting a rental subsidy from HUD. You say, I'm not going to take Section 8. That would be a form of discrimination. Now, if you can still say, usually you say you have to make 3 times the amount of rent, you can have qualifications as far as where their source of income is coming from. You can verify that income if you think they're a drug dealer and that they don't have a verifiable source of income. I mean, they should be putting this money in the bank and have a bank account. If they're constantly paying you cash, you can say we don't accept cash payments. So I guess it depends on the scenario, but for the most part, you can have income qualifications for your individuals and your applicants.
Okay. There's another question here. It says, do you know the CAR form that addresses the love letter?
I think that's a question for you all. I have
exactly.
heard, yeah, that's a technical association question that I'm sure you could get them.
Okay, yeah. HUD may not have the answer to that question, so if another realtor wants to chime in, that would be great. Or you can always call your CAR hotline if you have questions about any CAR form.
Mm-hmm. And I did just hear something from another real estate workshop that they were addressing this issue, and I think CAR did just come up with some guidelines on it, but I honestly don't know the specifics. So I refer to the association and your resources.
Agreed. Okay, so we can just see if there's any more questions. If not, we'll go ahead and end the webinar. So here's your last chance to ask any more questions that you might have.
Last chance. And also I wanted to, while you guys are thinking of your last questions, I wanted to let you know that we are offering a free online home buyer workshop for first-time buyers to help them get their HUD home buyer certificate. It's a 2-part series. First part is this Saturday, 9 to 11. Second part is the following Saturday, 9 to 11. It's free if you have clients who are interested in buying. Once they attend, we go through all of the home buying process, credit, different loan programs, different down payment assistance programs. And at the end of it, they get a certificate that where they'd be eligible for down payment assistance programs. Feel free to share this information with your clients, and I'm happy to send this over to Shirley so she can share it with you. We'll be covering a lot of great information, and then we, once they're done with the program, we send them back to you guys to go show them properties and help them kind of figure out what they can qualify to buy. And it's a really great opportunity for them to get educated. So I invite you all to, utilize this as a resource as well. I want to thank you guys very much for having me today. And I'm happy to answer any more questions if there's any more questions.
Looks like we're all set, Kathy, and I will go ahead and any information you want to send me, I can forward to all the attendees later today.
Okay, thank you so much. Appreciate, and I apologize for the technical glitch there. Thank
Hey,
you so
it
much.
happens.
Okay, thank
Thank
you so
you.
much. All right, take care.
All right.
Bye.
Bye-bye.